In this video, we're going to start working with our V-Ray standard material and focus first of all on creating just the diffuse or colour properties for the floor in our interior scene. Although of course the steps we use for just this single material can also be applied to creating the diffuse properties for all of the geometry that we have in our scene. Now, up to this point in our chapter, all of the geometry that we have in model has had a single default grey standard material applied. In fact, if we open up the V-Ray material editor by clicking the M icon on the V-Ray toolbar, we can see that this is the only material that we currently have in our scene. The diffuse properties, that is the base coloration for the material, are in this instance being handled by the controls that are housed in the diffuse rollout. A left click on the colour swatch here gives us the ability to alter the base or diffuse colour. So if we swap our light grey for a nice bright blue and click OK, we see that our geometry in the viewport does indeed turn blue. Let's just reset that by applying a grayscale value of 128. As I don't actually want to make any changes to the default grey material in this instance, let's go ahead and create a new standard material that we can use to apply some diffuse colour to our floor. Now we could create a new material from right here inside the V-Ray material editor and build from the ground up, as it were. Let's assume, however, that we are a SketchUp user who likes to make use of the default materials that install with the application and demonstrate a very nice feature of the V-Ray for SketchUp engine in connection with SketchUp's own material library. To do so, let's first of all close our V-Ray material editor for a while and click instead on the Paint Bucket tool in order to open up the SketchUp materials browser. In here, we have a wide range of SketchUp materials that can be used to paint surface colour onto our models. The cool thing here is that we don't need to think of these as just SketchUp materials whenever we are using the V-Ray engine. To show what I mean, with the Select tool enabled, let's select all of the floor geometry by first of all double and then triple clicking on it, and then jump into one of the relevant material sections in the SketchUp editor, such as Tile. From here we can select any one of the materials, paint it onto the floor, and as we would expect, the material now shows up in our SketchUp viewport, already set up at a fairly correct UV scale. What we might not have expected though is what has happened behind the scenes. If we just reopen our V-Ray material editor, you can see that we actually have the material we just created listed here. You will also notice that it has been created as a V-Ray standard material with the diffuse colour map already plugged in. Of course, no other material properties such as bump or reflectivity have been added, but if we are happy to use SketchUp's default materials as a starting point, or perhaps it is that we have built up a library of our own SketchUp materials over the years, then I'm sure you will agree that this is a very nice way to jumpstart the creation of realistic materials in V-Ray. Now, unfortunately, this is not the material that I want to apply to our floor here, and so let's quickly right-click on it and use the Remove Material command. Let's then go ahead and create a new standard material by right-clicking on the Scene Materials label, coming to the Create Material flyout, and choosing the Standard Material option. Once created, we can right-click on the material, choose the Rename option, and call this V-Ray_Floor. With the floor geometry selected, let's right-click on the material again and use the Apply Material to Selection command. Of course, we are now back to having just a plain grey material, so let's again change the diffuse properties, only this time by adding a new V-Ray BRDF layer to the material. We can do this by right-clicking on the material, and from the Create Layer flyout, choosing the V-Ray BRDF option. Once added, we just need to make certain that the diffuse colour controls on the BRDF layer are the ones being used by the material. So let's adjust the layer hierarchy in our materials list by dragging the default diffuse layer to the bottom. We can go ahead and apply our custom bitmap now by clicking on the map button next to the diffuse colour swatch, and in the texture editor dialog, use the drop down to select the text bitmap option. Straight away, this opens up a Select Bitmap dialog, which we can use to navigate to our exercise files folder, and from the texture files folder, load the wood_floor_v2_base color texture map. As soon as I click Open, and then OK, we see this gets applied to our floor geometry. Now, one problem we can run into when building our materials from scratch in this way centers around the issue of scale. You see, in reality, SketchUp has no idea at what scale this particular bitmap is meant to be applied. To fix that, let's come into SketchUp's material browser, make certain that we are looking at the in-model materials, and that our floor map is selected so that we can edit it. A scale of about 8 foot should work nicely here, and if we take a test render now, we can see that everything is working just fine. I do want to finish this material off a little more before we close by adding some bump detail to it. A bump map being an image that the renderer can use to simulate the appearance of depth or bump in a material. Let's come to the Maps rollout of the wood floor material then, enable the bump option and click on the map button. Again, we want to make use of the text bitmap node here, and from the loader dialog, load in the wood_floor_v2_normal.png file. Because we have already set the scale for the material in SketchUp's material browser, everything should drop nicely into place for us, with the only change, seeing as we are using a normal map here as opposed to a grayscale height map, being the need for us to swap the bump type from bump to normal map tangent space. With our diffuse colour properties taken care of, we're going to move at this point onto improving the realism of our material by demonstrating how we can go about adding reflectivity to the mix.